cost of living crisis right now is one of the biggest stressors for almost everybody, even here in the UAE, where we are. There's a reasonable amount of affluence. Even Saudi Arabia as well. In recent studies, it comes out as the top reason for stress. We are in this really interesting, destabilized time right now where we have a conflict between, do we want to be progressive or do we want to change the way we do things? Or are we desperate to try and put work back in the box that it was in 5 years ago, which is the same Henry Ford model that's been around for 100 years, which is you come and sit in an office and work from 9 to 5 in front of me where I can see you because then I can control you.
Joining me on the couch is Scott Armstrong, who's the CEO and founder of a business called Mentl.
Kids are spending less time with their parents than ever before.
Agree.
And therefore those mentals, for many of us, we're too busy and we're stressed out beyond belief. We're not the inspirational mentors that maybe our fathers and forefathers and mothers and grandmothers were.
Unfortunately, we live in an ecosystem where in isolation some of these things are not able to materialize themselves.
We're in a period of disruption, and I think the only thing I say to organizations is that business world is littered with stories of organizations that ignored disruption when it came.
Welcome to today's episode of Couchonomics with Arjun. Joining me on the couch is Scott Armstrong, who's the CEO and founder of a business called Mentl. And obviously it's in mental health. I've never met Scott prior to about 15 minutes ago when he walked into the studio and we said hello. But I read up on a few things that he had written on LinkedIn and saw his background. And I thought it would be an interesting sort of dimension to bring into the conversation, especially in season 3, where we're trying to explore, different angles towards what challenges we face as executives, startup founders, professionals in this world of financial services. Enough with the introductions. Let me welcome Scott to the couch. Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Arjun. I'm surprised we haven't met because we go to the same hairdresser.
Well, there you go, right? Well, my hairdresser is me because it's too expensive to actually go to a hairdresser every morning, right? But Scott, no, welcome to the show. And I think you asked me a very relevant question when we started, which is, for a show which is so specific on its topic around future of finance, why would I go ahead and write to you and invite you onto the show? And I think my answer to this is that, we're trying to build a holistic picture in terms of, what are some of the challenges and opportunities that, the entire sector faces. And I think one of the biggest challenges with future of finance is the role the individuals, or what we might call the talent, will have to play. And I think the little I've read and heard about what you're doing and some of the people who are your peers in the market, I think is becoming an integral and more important part of, what it means to be a professional, which basically boils down to what it means to be a human.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
But let me start, before we get into the conversation, and I've got some, I guess, half interesting questions, because by no means can I position myself as someone who knows the topic of mental health. Talk a little bit about you, Scott, sort of what's your background, where have you come from, and a little bit about, what is Mentl?
So Mentl is a mental health advocacy platform, and we've kind of got a two-stream mission. So one is to normalize the conversation around mental health and well-being and challenge the stigma that exists in societies all around the world about mental health. And that's very much sort of B2C. So we have a wider community mission. And then we have a kind of B2B strand where we work with companies, because we spend, as you say, the kind of the truth of being a professional is we spend so much of our lives, and actually the economic performance of companies is so linked to mental health and well-being. So we work with companies on that basis. It's taken me a while to get to this mission. I was a journalist since I was 16 years old, so 33 years. I always tried to be a campaigning journalism, so I always did try to help. We changed the law in the UK to protect children from kidnappers, or I was shown around number 10 Downing Street by Tony Blair for getting people back into work. So I've always believed in lifting up, which is perhaps atypical in journalism. There's a lot of pulling down. And this Mentl was kind of born out of a perfect storm of, I lost my father to mental health. That woke me up to the challenges and the fact that it could impact anybody, because my father was like one of the strongest men I knew. Strong but silent, never spoke about his feelings, had no defense against depression, and we lost him within 3 months. That woke me up to a lot of stuff that was going on within me. And then as you see it, and I looked at the world that my children are growing up in and the mental health challenges that their generation are facing, I just felt it was time to do something with a bit more purpose and meaning. So that's where Mentl was kind of born.
Right, that's fascinating, and it's interesting to actually for the first time have a journalist on the couch. I have no idea, but I don't think I have yet spoken to a journalist, but I've been through about 75 episodes. So if there was a journalist, he or she will forgive me for that. Very keen to hear. I'm just going to sort of give you a very open-ended question. Talk to me a little bit about the state of the nation from a mental health perspective, and I'll be interested to hear both views, which is at an individual as level, which could sort of sit with your B2C sort of strand, and then from a corporate perspective in terms of how mental health is manifesting itself for corporates.
I wish I could give you good news on either front, but actually I can't. Both are fairly alarming in some respects. I mean, if we look globally, I think the World Health Organization said that 1 in 4 of us will struggle with mental health. Here in the UAE, that's actually 1 in 3 for a few different reasons. There was a big survey recently that surveyed 500,000 people around the world in 71 different countries, including the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And the news is that it's not good news. They gave every country what they called an MHQ, a mental health quotient score.
Okay.
And it was marked out of 200, and not a single country got over 100. And not a single country could be described as thriving, succeeding. It went on a scale from failing and in distress to enduring to managing. And managing was the best the world is doing right now. It is managing. It's not succeeding or thriving in terms of its mental health. In that study, the UAE and Saudi Arabia beat the global average. The global average was 65. So they beat it just 68, 69. And that said there that it was about, again, 1 in 4 of us were in distress in terms of the UAE and Saudi Arabia. But then you looked at other countries such as the UK that came second from last in that report, where more than 35% of people were in distress. So from a global perspective, it's not good. Here in this region, in the UAE and Saudi and the GCC, there is more potential. The UAE, there's another big piece of research that we were kind of involved with, which was the Cigna Vitality Study, and that tracks 8 different metrics, from your emotional, your financial, your social, your spiritual health. And in that, the UAE and Saudi Arabia came out as one of the best nations in terms of vitality. But then it's worth saying that the UAE's score on vitality was that 32% of people in the UAE could be classed as having high vitality. Now, that's 32%. What about the other 68%? I think let's say that's the room for improvement. But that 32% was one of the highest scores around the world. That piece of research as well, for me, really kind of nailed life here in this region right now, which was, high vitality, but high stress. Nearly 90% of people had suffered from stress in the past year. 99% of respondents in the UAE and 95% of respondents in Saudi Arabia had struggled with at least one symptom of burnout. And again, 90% said that they felt they were always on. It's basically always on WhatsApp, but always on, never able to disconnect from work. And that's here it's a bit of it's a blessing and a curse, because we've got lots of opportunity, we've got lots of ambition, there's lots of work, and there's lots of really big projects that people are chasing. But that said, we're working really, really hard, and we are always on. And the studies tell us that we are burning out. And that is something that we see year after year after year. Stress around the world is not going down, it's going up. It's absolutely flat. We thought we'd be in a better position. We thought the pandemic was peak stress and we'd be getting better. But we're not. If anything, we're kind of getting worse a bit.
There's a lot to sort of chew in there, right? So let me ask...
bright way to start the podcast.
Well, yeah, exactly, right? You said, because I experience what you say every day of the world, right? I work in a sector which is known for sort of high stress environment, and I think it's just accepted. We talk about it a lot. Very few organizations of very few people can do much about it. Some people can self-regulate themselves. The vast majority of us fail.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely in the 68% as you correctly outlined. Let's deconstruct the problem a little bit for me here, right? And I'm going to oversimplify it. So apologies if I'm oversimplifying a very complex problem. If I just take stress equal to mental health just now, right, as a proxy. So let me just take stress as a proxy for mental health. I'm sure there's a lot more.
Yeah.
Right. What is it that is really driving, or what is the top 1 or 2 or 3 things which is driving us up the up the stress curve, if I may call it? Is it the fact that we live our lives surrounded by all forms of electronics, right? So we're always on.
Yeah.
Is it that our organizations are demanding that much more? Is it that we are all very materially driven, so this constant strive for wanting more and being dissatisfied? Is it that generally the family unit, right, in a global environment where divorce rates are at an all-time high, separations are at an all-time high, there's stress coming through an environment, etc., etc., etc. So social acceptance, so on and so forth. What are the 1 or 2 things that you guys are seeing being the primary drivers of stress for people like you, me, or anybody else?
I could oversimplify and say all of the above.
No, I know, but that's why I'm putting you on the spot to say, is there 1 or 2 things? Because, it starts feeling overwhelming after a while in terms of how do you tackle, because you can't tackle stress. You've got to tackle the underlying cause of stress.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that is, and stress, and when we look at the world of work, so the world of the work is probably one of the biggest influences on mental health, because we are going to spend a third of our lives there. And there is research that says that, even as an individual, your line manager, your direct line manager is basically responsible for 70% of your well-being, whereas you are in control of 30% of your well-being. So that environment that you go into every day has, whether you can control it or not, has a massive part to play in your mental health. So the world of work in one. Breaking that down, the cost of living crisis right now is one of the biggest stresses for almost everybody, even here in the UAE, where we are, there's a reasonable amount of affluence. In Saudi Arabia as well, in recent studies, it comes out as the top reason for stress. Outside of that, it is the always on culture. And we are in this really interesting, destabilized time right now where we have a conflict between do we want to be progressive, or do we want to change the way we do things, or are we desperate to try and put work back in the box that it was in 5 years ago, which is the same Henry Ford model that's been around for 100 years, which is you come and sit in an office and work from 9 to 5 in front of me where I can see you, because then I can control you, and a one size fits all style of management will work for me because that's easy and that's simple and it's cheap. Unfortunately, the pandemic did wake a lot of people up, and we're almost victims of our own enlightenment to a degree, is because we know we deserve better, perhaps. We know we can have better. And there is a desire across the generations. We're seeing that Gen X and Boomer leaders are seriously miserable, and actually a higher percentage of those want to leave their jobs to find a better work-life balance than the general populace of a workforce, which is generally around about 55%, whereas I think it's 67% of C-suites and leaders are actually looking for that different balance. So we've woken up to the fact that actually maybe it doesn't have to be this way. But unfortunately, having that knowledge, it hasn't made us happier. It's made us less satisfied, because we're now looking for the right opportunity. And there is this, when you are suddenly faced with a situation like the pandemic, which is, I won't swear on the podcast, but, this could be it. Or I've actually lost someone really close to me. You are then, all of a sudden going, am I actually living a life that is aligned with my values? Or if tomorrow is my last day, then what have I done with my life?
So let me stop you right there, because I listen to this and I hear this all the time, and I hear this in podcasts and so on and so forth, but I don't see enough people acting on it, right? And what I actually get very confused about is this attitude of them and us in the workplace, because there is no them and us. It's us who will eventually become them, or them who will become us. So explain that to me, because I talk about a lot. I don't see many people change their lifestyles. We're all going back to work or back to the office in swathes, because companies are now, and even the so-called progressive organizations have recently sort of requested people to come back to work. So yes, it woke us up all to this reality that, are we doing the right thing? But how many of us are actually acting upon it? Or maybe I don't have the right data points.
I would say it's interesting, because I was in a round table of C-suite thinkers just last week. Orascom, major developer, they build super communities around the world. So they brought together this quite eclectic mix. But there was, McKinsey people in there. There were former bankers. There were former senior people in global communications companies, all that kind of thing. And I asked exactly that same question, like, how many in this room have made that change in the last year or two? And 75% of the room had.
Okay.
And that to me was I was surprised by that.
Okay.
But I am seeing it increasingly, that yes, actually, while you might not be seeing it, it's happening there. It's interesting because we see the startups, the startup community. It's just getting more and more and more. Now, that's not saying that startups are succeeding, and there is a mental health issue seriously in the startup zone. But there's a massive demographic within those startups that are our age, Arjun, not necessarily 25-year-olds with algorithms. So it is happening. Now, is it easy for organizations to transition that way? No, it's not.
But then why aren't these mental health indicators getting better?
Why are they getting better?
Yeah, because if people are making these changes, then I would imagine the whole I'm just looking at some.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is the data, but the data often looks at corporations, because the vast majority of us are employed in corporations.
Yep.
And unfortunately, corporations are struggling with this concept, and there is a real generational divide on this one.
Okay.
Where boomers and Gen X, when we grew up in the world of work, it was yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, don't talk about your feelings, and actually you've got no rights, you work for me and I own you. Whereas we've now got millennials and very much Gen Z coming through, who are like saying no, and I'm actually quite prepared to go to a new career or a new job, whether I've been here a year or 2 years, I don't care. That is Gen Z's attitude. Whereas our generations would stay in a situation far longer because it was expected, or because we had mortgages.
We were more resilient, less entitled.
Well, you say that. I was just which is an interesting conversation, and whether you talk about resilience or not. I really feel for the kids today, which sounds a bit patronizing, but if you think of the way we came into the world of work, like, we didn't have email, we didn't have, WhatsApp, we didn't have social media, we didn't have this absolute. I remember seeing something like the GDP is just accelerated and accelerated and accelerated, and there's been all these technological shifts that we have had step changes. Yeah. So we've had time to get and we've grown to the point where we're in this world of work now, and I'm 51, you're much younger than me, but we've had time to mature and form our worldview and our mental health view, and we are still struggling. The kids today are thrown into this. That's it. They didn't have to, their life is not, our life was much simpler. And if you talk about entitled, what were we entitled to? We were entitled to go home at 5 o'clock and switch off and not think about work. We were entitled to go home at the weekend and not think about work. We were entitled to one day hope that we can own a house, because it was much easier to get onto the property ladder when we were, growing up, as opposed to the kids these days. So we say they're less resilient, but they've grown up in this absolute sewer of detritus, that's picked at their mental health their entire lives. And the latest research saying, if you're a parent and you can keep your kid away from a smartphone and social media, you really want to, because the earlier a kid gets on a smartphone, the worse their mental health is going to be as they grow up.
No, and that's true. And I'm a father.
So it's easy for us to simplify this issue, but actually we had a simpler life. And you look around, they call them the blue zones around the world where people live the longest. The simpler their life, the better the mental health. And our kids have got a much more complicated, polarized life than we had when we were their age, and we were going through all those hormonal changes and trying to grow up and mature.
I get that. I was just being facetious with that sort of line.
I felt someone needs to speak up.
No, you should.
Not that they have any problem speaking up for themselves.
Not at all. Trust me. I know. I have 2 young ones in the house. You mentioned some very interesting statistics before we started our dialogue in terms of the implication that mental health is having on productivity in the workplace in dollar terms.
Yeah.
I'd like you to sort of replay some of those numbers.
Absolutely.
And sort of how real they're actually becoming and how concerning they're becoming to some of the leaders in the organizations which are starting to pay attention to mental health.
Well, they absolutely should be paying attention, because the fact is that there's, around the world, there are trillions of dollars going up. And this is through disengaged, workers. This is presenteeism. And the UE figure, and this is based on the Gallup State of the Global Workforce, huge study. The UE figure was $10.3 billion a year, which I think works out at around, when you look at normal working hours in any given year, it's about $5 million an hour going up in smoke through lost productivity. If that doesn't, we've actually created this kind of clock that ticks up in real time to the second. And sometimes we'll just sit in front of a CEO and play it. And then you can see the dawning horror as they, in 5 minutes, you do the 5-6 figures, so that's huge. If you looked at the same economics in Saudi Arabia, would say there was around 25 billion going up in smoke. So there's huge economic implications for organizations who don't take this seriously and who don't embrace it. They're losing money. And on the flip side of it, I always quote a study, which is a study of 100 studies. When we look at the ROI of investing in the well-being of your team, 327% is the average across 100 different studies. And you can go to the biggest companies and the smallest companies. You can go to Canada, where Bell Telecom would tell you that they got $6 back for every dollar invested. The standard that people talk about across most pieces of research is $4 for every dollar invested. I prefer the 327% just because it is the average across 100 different studies. So if you're looking at this from a conservative perspective, you are conservatively losing millions, or you conservatively stand to make millions. It's kind of your choice. So it is time that the world wake up to it. Otherwise, they're going to be out of business.
Okay. So 2 questions, right?
Yeah.
Firstly, more and more organizations are talking about mental health being important to them. What percentage of them are just playing lip service, and
well-washing?
What percentage of them are wishing well and really not doing anything about it? And second part to that question, and you feel free to sort of answer this in one go, is with all the work that you guys have been doing at Mentl and work which is being done by a number of peer organizations globally, what are the sort of top 2 or 3 interventions that companies are being able to successfully make, which is driving to a better, I guess, mental health quotient for that organization, and hence greater productivity, whether or not
Absolutely.
that translates into dollars or not? That's something we
I think the first question, and you're right in that there are a number of organizations, and sometimes very well-meaning organizations as well, that will do a series of interventions. Those series of interventions, if the narrative behind them isn't a cultural one, then you're basically dropping a pebble in a pond, and it will ripple out so far and then die and disappear, and any benefits you get from those interventions will soon fade away. The first step for any organization is to look at and to have a very honest conversation with itself and look at its culture, because if you it's a bit like having the pool table in the middle of the room that nobody dare play on. If you are a hierarchy of fear, if you have a culture that actually doesn't value well-being, you can say you're going to do well-being, and actually all of the research shows, and there's a big new piece out from Oxford University, they have a well-being unit, so scientists at Oxford University have found that actually if your culture's not right, if you haven't created a psychologically safe space where your talent can be seen, heard, and valued, that doesn't mean they don't work hard. It just means that they feel that it can be seen, heard, and valued, and feel safe coming forward and expressing an opinion or an idea, or indeed their state of well-being. That if you then try and layer on things like mindfulness or time management, you're basically transferring the problem from your organization onto the individual. And you talk about regulating and, can people self-regulate? Organizations that tell employees you have to self-regulate our inferno, but here's some mindfulness training or here's some time management training, actually lose talent faster. Those mindfulness well-being initiatives actually hurt their team as opposed to help them, because you're basically blaming your employees for not being strong enough and resilient enough to be able to cope with your demands. So the first question you have to ask is, okay, what is the nature of our work? What is the nature of the ask? Is it fair? And then once you understand that, from there you can go, right, okay, so this is a tough job. This is a hard job. How do we make that better? What are the things that the people who turn up every day, what do they need to make this an acceptable place, or even a job that they can thrive in? What are their goals? How do we help them achieve their goals? So it's having that conversation. So the first thing is to go, can we actually have an honest conversation about this? Because in many organizations, the HR departments will go out there and go, oh yes, we've done a pulse survey and we've asked everybody how they are. And it's like, oh yes, and 60% of them say they're fine. Oh yeah, great. But only 40% of people in the company actually responded to the pulse survey. So you've actually got 60% of 40%. So what about the other
76%?
76%. Good maths, like that. And often companies go into this with looking for confirmation bias. They're looking to go, oh, we're okay, it's fine. So we can carry on just doing a little bit here and a little bit there. So first step is having that honest conversation. And then the second step is actually recognizing that this is going to be a fundamental driver of your business. So how do you actually build the time in to your Outlook calendar to ensure that you tackle this problem? Because you're not going to do it ad hoc. Do you have a strategy? Does it appear on your calendar in the same way that you're going to meet with your finance director every week, and there'll be an hour meeting with that person, and you're probably going to have an hour meeting with your health and safety person? Where is well-being and mental health in your diary? Again, just to quote Cigna, they've got an interesting campaign which we helped launch here, which is called the 5% Pledge. And that was about getting leaders to pledge that they would spend 5% of their time purely focused on the mental health of their teams. Now, 5% doesn't sound like a big figure, but actually when you think about it, it is 2.5 hours in any CEO's diary every week. Every week, a CEO is going to sit there for 2.5 hours and think about, how can I make the well-being of my team better? Now, you 10x that time with the senior leadership team, and then suddenly you've got a big block of time in which you can be really talking and learning and listening and figuring out what strategy works with inside your company. And every company is going to be different. Every industry is different. And it's funny, I've seen this done best in organizations where you would think people wouldn't flourish. Emirates Global Aluminium are a good example. They're a foundry that's hot molten metal. People work in extreme temperatures throughout the day. And they did a really interesting thing, which was they took mental health and well-being away from HR and they gave it to health and safety. And that changes the cultural conversation immediately, because HR, and I know there are good HR departments out there, and I know there are very passionate people in the HR community, but often they're seen by their communities as policy police. Mm-hmm. They're not there on behalf of the individual, they're there for the company and to make sure that procedures are followed. Whereas health and safety are there to protect the workforce. And changing that. So they gave health and safety the lead on mental health and well-being and said, go away and do it. We're not going to ask for the ROI right now. We're not going to ask you to set in strong KPIs. Just follow your lead, see what you want. And they did. And at the end of the year, they had their best financial year ever.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about mental health. If I'm going to again split mental health into mitigation and management, right? Here's where I struggle with mitigation, and arguably the same logic could be applied to management, right? A lot. So if I oversimplify, I say, something, we had simpler lives, as you said, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And a lot of that had to do with this always on mentality, access to emails and laptops and stuff. So, what if an organization says, at 6 p.m. in the evening or 7 p.m. in the evening, switch everything else off. Nobody's going to trouble you on the weekends. Fact of the matter is, it doesn't work that way because we live in this very hyper-connected environment, right? You as an organization might in isolation make certain decisions, but everybody else in your sort of ecosystem of connections, which are, suppliers, customers, partners, and so on and so forth, they don't really, if I may say, care about what your mitigation plans are, right? So the question I have for you, please don't answer straight away because let me pose the second question is, are there any smart mitigating factors or mitigating strategies that can be implemented, arguably in isolation as an organization, because we live in a hyper-connected world? If you come down to managing strategies or managing stress or mental health, right? We're all fairly unique in the way we deal with stress and the way it manifests on itself and the way we manage it, right? I, for one, have realized, and I guess, I have hurt myself physically a lot through stress over the last 5 to 7 years. But the big difference is, I don't think my life is more stressful in the last 5 to 7 years. Someone could argue it is. It's just my body's ability to cope with years is not as good, right? So how do you actually manage stress in large organizations when actually the problem manifests at an individual level, right? So, sweeping policy decisions might not be the answer because the way someone who actually has a low threshold to a high threshold will respond very differently, or does it really not matter?
Well, I mean, and again, there isn't unfortunately, to oversimplify things, there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. That said, so if we look at management to start with, in any organization, there will be stress and there will be times. The distinction between good companies and bad companies is, do people feel generally safe inside an organization? And then thus they are resilient when stressors come? Or is the stress always on? Because actually stress over time is actually physically bad, as you know, for us. And it's actually really bad for productivity as well, because our neurons begin to fire less. It damages our neurons, which makes us less productive members of the team. So it's bad for business. So from a management perspective, are you again creating a psychologically safe space where people feel empowered? If people feel empowered, they don't necessarily need more money, but do they feel empowered? When they walk through the door, do they feel safe? We talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that sort of thing. Do they feel safe to start with? Or, and the UAE has been on an interesting journey. If we look at the UAE, which was actually where we are right now in the UAE, we've got the public sector, we've got the government saying we want to be the happiest nation on the planet. It's revamped a whole bunch of laws. It has created green visas, 5-year visas, golden visas. It's widened and improved its employment labour laws to give much more access to individuals that want to take their employees to court if they feel like they've had unfair treatment. I know that one by heart. There is the ability to have whistleblowers. They are now taking the gratuities off employers. So what's traditionally happened here is that in the private sector, employees have had this very easy lever, existential lever to pull to go, do as you're told, otherwise you lose your job and you're out. And if you think, when you used to be out here, you used to have 30 days to find another job or you were gone. Now you've got 6 months. So the government here is actually prioritizing talent. It's doing what companies should do. And actually, I speak to people in the government and they basically say, you can be one of two types of corporations on this one. You can be the early adopters that pick up all the advantages of being an early adopter, but eventually this is a train that's coming down the tracks at you, and you're either going to be on board the train or you'll be run down by it. So that hierarchy of fear is being diminished and dismantled by the government here. So it means that employees, talent, now have more flexibility. They have a savings scheme now. You're now paying into an unemployment insurance. So if you are fired by your company, your access to legal advice and your ability to bring a case against them is much stronger than it used to be. You've got unemployment insurance payment that will tide you over for 6 months. You have 6 months to look for a job. If you're lucky enough, you're either on a 5-year green visa or a 10-year visa. You're not on your employee's visa. So you are free. You're able to walk out the door with much less consequence. So that is changing the nature of people's engagement in work and their ability to look at the world of work and go, right, I am shackled to that, rather than I can roll the dice and take more of a risk. And it's an interesting one because, this place is brilliant. No one wants to leave the UAE right now, or particularly the UAE. Go back to the UK, for example, where, again, this mental health study says they've got the second worst mental health in the world. We know how amazing our life is. Nobody wants to take their kids out of school and pack up bags and go back to the UK. That used to be really, a really easy lever for employees to pull, but increasingly less so. So from that management perspective, like the old tactics aren't going to work anymore. And again, they won't work with Gen Z because Gen Z is also walking through the door with one eye on the door. Like, how am I going to add value here for the next 2 years? And what am I going to get back for it? And then I'm going to go on to the next thing and go on to the next thing and go on to the next thing. The common wisdom is that your Gen Z talent's going to have 3 careers in their life rather than one career.
So let's come to Gen Z for a second, right? This is very interesting. And I think, so there's a whole cohort of Gen Zs and Gen Alphas which are getting ready to come into the workplace, right? Funnily enough, they are actually suffering from the mental health pandemic,
yes,
right? Worse than
consistently in every single report we see.
So actually, they're walking into their jobs with already mental health issues, which have been generated out of completely different reasons than what you and I are facing, or I guess the generation after us, whatever that 30 to sort of 50 category is, right? Any interesting studies, any interesting takeaways that you have coming out of through what you've read or you guys have done yourself in terms of learning about this generation, and how do we make the best kind of use of the resources in a manner that works for them? Because I agree with you. I don't think that whole tactics of fear, right, to whatever level or degree that has been applied to different, different friends or acquaintances of ours or peers of ours applies to them. But how do you deal with this generation, which is, which to me is kind of the modern day Prozac generation?
Unfortunately, you're going to have to listen, and you can't just tell. I mean, that's the first thing. But what's to talk about studies, Dr. Zoe Fortune, who works here, she's with one of the universities, forgive me, I think it's University of Birmingham, but I forgot that one wrong. But she was also connected to a massive mental health study in Hong Kong as well. And they looked very specifically at what the world of work wanted and what the world of university created. And there's a big disconnect in our education system.
Hugely.
Massive, and the biggest thing that we are not teaching kids is how to do exactly what we're doing right now, Arjun, which is to sit and discuss and talk and connect and look each other in the eye and emotionally connect as well. Whether you like me or dislike me, whether we have controversy and confrontation, this generation are not being taught that. They're not being taught kindness. They're not being taught emotional intelligence. That was never needed, but it's needed now more than ever before. So you've got a generation that are coming out through, again, social media. The bedroom used to be the safest place when we were growing up. If you were bullied, I was bullied, I'm happy to say, but I could escape to my books and my bedroom, and that's a safe space. Now the bedroom is one of the most dangerous places for a child growing up because they've got thousands of people just willing to spew hate at them. So they're coming into a world of work already with fragile insecurities and confidence issues because we're not teaching confidence in school. They're coming through university.
Do you think schools can teach you that?
Yes, they can. There are plenty of programs out there that can teach you that. You can go on now as a manager, you can go on an emotional intelligence course. You think it's for us to discover naturally, but it isn't. You can be taught that. Kids are spending less time with their parents than ever before.
Agreed.
And therefore, those mentors, for many of us, we're too busy and we're stressed out beyond belief. We're not the inspirational mentors that maybe our fathers and forefathers and mothers and grandmothers were, but also that generation are also dealing with a raft of problems that our generation really don't understand and still haven't really got to grips with yet. So in terms of Gen Z coming through, but again, we used to call them soft skills, and now actually I hate that term. And in the world of AI, they are actually core skills more than anything else right now. And the world of work would be telling the world of the university and the world of academia, you're teaching them technical skills. We can teach them technical skills. We can teach them processes. We need you to teach people. And that's what's happening, is they're leaving this very protected, safe place, and then we throw them into the fire. And we just say, right, we sank or swam, so you're going to sink or swim, except the water's running a lot faster these days than it was than when we jumped in.
Yeah, and I think you're very correct, because I, as a parent, make that mistake fairly regularly, where I have to remind my kids, well, when I was young, right? Which I agree with you is not the
utterly
right way.
Irrelevant.
Yeah, utterly irrelevant.
Sorry.
Don't say that to my daughters, right? Because that's kind of the only line I have.
Yeah.
Stop working in any case.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something which is going to be universally impacting all of us, and I think you just mentioned it, which is the world of AI, right? So AI is finding its way into our world of I guess commerce and society, both, right? At a hyper speed, right? Machine learning and all of this stuff has existed for years, but at the speed of adoption of AI is at its, well, it's not hit its peak, but it's actually at its highest it's ever been, right? It's creating all kinds of human responses, everything from being ecstatic around, the power of AI and what it can do for us, and also fear, right? In terms of, are we going to be replaced? Are we going to be subsidized? Are our jobs not going to be as precious, so we're not going to make our money? And then there is this whole generation which is sort of coming in, which I feel is getting polarized between people who are incredibly comfortable using AI and others who are not, who are feeling, well, if we are in the have-nots category, right, we might not have a future before we've even arrived at the door, right?
Absolutely.
What are you seeing in terms of AI as a topic and its implications on mental health, if I may use that term, right? And what's your perspective on how do you see this all kind of, I guess, how does the cookie crumble?
Well, just a simple question then. I genuinely believe in two almost like two opposite things at the same time, which is that AI is the future of humanity, but humanity is also the future of humanity. So I think it is a tool there to be harnessed. I think all the fears are relevant, and all the optimism and all the adoption is relevant as well. It's interesting. I was at an event, was MC and host of an event in the banking industry just last week, which was all focused on the future. It was incredibly future facing, and how basically that discussion around, okay, are we a finance company that embraces technology, or are we trying to transition to being a technology company that's a specialist in finance? And having all these asking these existential questions. And I sat and had panel conversation after panel conversation with all these amazing people that had an incredible futurist who came in and talked about basically everything you've seen on Star Trek exists now, even transporters to a limited degree. Like the degree that our fridge is going to come and rule our lives at some point, how smart our fridges are getting. Like my fridge is already smarter than I am. It's not even connected to the internet, but it is smarter than I am. But asking all these existential questions. But the answer every single time as well came back to, this is the technology, but these are the human beings that are going to implement it. And these are the skills, the creativity, the innovative thinking. It's not just going to be AI. We're still going to need human beings. And human beings increasingly are going to need that humanity. So in terms of mental health, leaning into our humanity, stepping away from being process driven to being thought creators to being passionate individuals is only going to be more and more and more important. Emotional intelligence is going to be one of the biggest tools, because right now AI doesn't have that down by a long way. And actually, I think when you look at the new European regulations on AI, the emotional manipulation is one of the things that they're actually like, no, you're not going there, you can't do that. So it's going to be interesting to see how AI comes up in the mental health industry. And we've seen a number of companies try and get AI to replace human beings in mental health provision. It's not working. It can be a tool, but the human beings are still hugely important. And it's interesting as well, because we've seen a number of technology companies who have basically gone in and gone, I want to monetize people in crisis, so here's an AI tool. But actually, that's not moving the needle on the mental health conversation. And there is some adoption, but there are companies who raise a lot of money and then lose a lot of money, because still that human connection is super, super important. And it will always be important. But yeah, are the fears... I was lucky enough to interview Blair Shepherd, who's the chief strategist for PwC globally. He wrote this really interesting book called 10 Years to Midnight, which is basically, the atomic clock. And he's kind of like warning of Armageddon, or some big Armageddon style forces in the world right now. And AI is very much one of these things. And he talks about the millions of people who will be out of work because of AI. And that is going to happen. And there is a lot of anxiety, very much particularly in, imagine if right now you were a 45 to 50-year-old male manager who can't use AI. So right now, you were promoted because you were good at a process. You are no good at leading people. In fact, you're one of those hierarchical fear bosses who are insecure in your position. So the only way you can hold on to that is to double down on I am right and I must always be right, and you can't actually have a conversation with me, which leads to then toxic workplaces. So imagine you're one of those. You're now being told that, quite rightly, diversity, equity, and inclusion matters, and it does, and it really matters to Gen Z and that next wave of talent that are going to make your company thrive. You're then being told, hang on, you've got to actually be emotionally vulnerable, and that's a difficult conversation for most men to have, most human beings to have, to be fair, but at least women are more emotionally intelligent than we are, and we need a lot more of them in the boardroom. But if you're that guy, you're terrified. Because you're beginning to wake up to the fact that you are probably already a dinosaur.
So where do you put AI in the mix of all this then?
Where do you put AI in the mix of that? The AI will be your middle manager. It will be your manager, because we already right now, managers are not, and that's the big fear as well with remote working, and it's not the answer. There are many professions in which remote working is not even possible. Mm-hmm. Hospitality. The healthcare sector. There are jobs where you just can't phone it in. But in the industries where you can have remote working, managers who are fearful of their own positions hate remote working, because what's their job? If their job isn't, like, you remember the overseer from the, if he's not the guy at the back of the boat banging the drum, then what's his job? If everybody's just off rowing themselves and they're empowered to row themselves, then what's their role? So I think there's a real crisis in middle management in companies, because a lot of middle management are going, what value do I actually add to the company? Now, where does AI come in there as well? Because that's the central question. What value do I add? And can AI do it? Now, if that value is insight, innovative thinking, inspiring my team to go above and beyond, problem solving, if it's those if I've got those human skills, then I'm actually still in a pretty okay place. But if I am just the manager of the Excel sheet, I don't need you. So there is a lot of fear there right now. So we're going to go through an evolution, which is in every evolution in industries, whether it's from the spinning jenny back, the first industrial revolution, there were jobs and there were processes that were done away with because we took that technological step up. It was the same thing when we went in my profession, when journalism went from hot metal to printing presses, to then the internet, and then so there will always be a level of arbitrage, I suppose, from these technological steps forward. The difference with this one is that it does present us with the opportunity to actually lean into our humanity more than ever before and go, okay, so how can we think creatively? What's the opportunity for me as an individual to add value? And frankly, who doesn't want to add value? It's like when we're an employee and we're adding value to our organization or to the world, your sense of purpose and your self-respect and your self-belief is stronger. Your mental health should actually improve if you are leaning into those mental skills that those human values that you possess. So there is a lot of fear, but it's also a massive opportunity, and not just an opportunity in the productivity space, but an opportunity for us. I'm now self-employed. I've been self-employed for 18 months, and I have got better and better in my output, and AI has really, really helped me. I no longer need a graphic artist for 20 hours. I might need them for the last final stretch of it, but I can sit down on Midjourney and go, with this, I want an image that does this and does that, and can you come up with a logo, or I've got an awards, give me a picture of that on a black background with a spotlight on it. I can think through the design. I can't do the design, but I can think through the design and then get it to a point. Now I'll get it so far, and then maybe I'll turn around to a graphic designer and go, right, give me an hour and just, but that's pretty much what I want. So that's made me more efficient. In social media output from podcasts, we have AI tools now that will subtitle everything, they'll crop everything. So from a video editor point of view, and sorry for the video editor sitting there, but it gets much easier for us to output more work. And I've really enjoyed going down this process where I used to be one thing, now I'm 10 things.
Yeah. So I'm conscious of time. I think to summary, I think you've painted a much more positive picture than I expected from AI. I personally see it, at least in the near future, AI will get smarter. As it gets smarter, I think the fear of AI will grow. Right, as the fear of AI grows, irrespective of where you are in that organization, either you're a middle manager or someone who's doing an activity which can get entirely replaced because it's highly repeatable and similar. I think mental health is going to be, I guess, is going to be directly correlated to the greater use of AI. I do think that AI is going to accentuate the mental illness issue across all spectrum of society. I actually do not know how we, either in the workplace or society, are actually going to cope up with it, because we're not being able to cope up with issues which were fairly in our control, right? Like a mobile device and an email, leave alone, AI, which is self-learning. And this is why I always tell people that don't classify AI as yet another emerging technology, because it is very different to blockchain or cloud or some of the other stuff that we use. This is something which is teaching itself. It's actually getting smarter on its own, and soon it'll start thinking for itself. It has already started doing it. So in any case, I'm a little bit more cautious, and I don't think any amount of regulation, right, can stop this from proliferating. Yes, we might delay it a little bit. We might, we might elongate the impact of AI, but we truly live in the age of AI, or at least have started that.
I believe so. No, and I agree with you. And that's why I say that there are two things can be true at the same time, though. That AI is the future of humanity, but humanity is the future of humanity.
No, it's good to hear that someone actually believes that humanity
I think, and if you talk to someone like Mo Gardat as well, he's quite famously sounded the alarm over AI as well. But the one thing we do need to look at, and this is why, with my mission, we try to talk about mental health. We try to challenge the stigma of mental health. We try to challenge the narrative that is in the world around mental health. The thing we've got to remember is, what are we teaching AI? And that's, so if AI is learning from 90% of the journalism that we output right now, which is polarizing and toxic, or the way that the algorithms and social media work, which is, highlight fear and anger because it keeps people engaged. If we teach, it's like raising a child. We are literally we're raising a child. And if you teach your child nothing but hate and fear, then it will grow up with serious issues and will literally live those values. But what we're trying to put out into the world is that positivity, is that ability to change, is that ability for us all to thrive, because we can thrive. whether it be the simple life or whether it be a very hyper-connected life, that we still can all thrive. But we need to kind of get off this materialistic gravy train that isn't working for us anyway, and actually go, right, the acquisition of things is not going to make me happy. That's the lie that the advertising industry has sold us. Actually, it's that journey inside, and to find out what are my values, what is important to me. Not everybody has values, and not everybody's going to have the opportunity to embrace those. But even if you have that conversation with yourself and you know yourself, I don't think our generation or my father's generation really had any understanding of who we were. I think I'm only beginning to find out who I am now. Whereas I think Gen Z do have a better sense going in as to their place in the world. I think we were sold that lie that we just, go out there, get a job, buy a house, buy a nicer car, buy a nicer house. That whole consumerist mission was, that's what's going to complete you. That's what's going to make you whole. And then how many guys get to our age and then have that midlife crisis and go, well, this is all BS. None of this has made me happy. I'm on my third wife. I'm about to have a nervous breakdown. I'm drinking myself to death. And we can be flippant about it. But on the flip side of that, actually, 700,000 suicides last year, 70% of them were men.
Yeah, and I guess this is my closing thought. I hear you. Again, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. But talk about the Gen Zs. I think they are highly entitled. I think more Gen Zs are living with their parents than I guess we did.
Yeah.
I think they're living a more subsidized life than we did.
Yeah.
You take some of those environments out,
Yeah.
right? Do they just not default to what lives we had to live? Because they have that comfort, right? Because the environment is given that comfort to say, fine, we'll adjust, we'll keep you at home, we'll subsidize your life, right? And so therefore you can be yourself. And I guess that opportunity was never given to, I guess, our generations, even with people, families which could afford to, right? If I may to say it. So I do appreciate that I think we were brought in, our generation grew up in a more monotone or a dual tone environment, and now there's more color and greater spectrum of complexity that you have. But I think this generation where I sit sometimes does worry me as much as I guess the problems that we face, because I think that the sense of reality, or maybe I've just got this wrong, is a little more lost on this generation. That's my view, right? It's just, and I have no sample set which is big enough. I'm talking reflective of people that I interact with, and I've not done any analysis. Having said that, I think what you brought home, and it's very interesting, right? Because we could have this conversation because for me, I'm just kind of taking it, sapping it all in, because my view is mental health is a big crisis, right? I think it is as big a pandemic as the COVID. There are suicides, there are burnouts, there's issue with people not thriving, there's lack of engagement, which is manifesting itself in all kinds of ways, either at home or at work, right? Unfortunately, I think the vast majority of the organization are what I call, they're sort of doing the greenwashing with mental.
Yeah, well-washing,
right?
Yeah.
What's it called?
Well-washing.
Well-washing. That's what it's called. Well, there you go. I learned a new term. So they're doing well-washing, where they all say that, we are very concerned. But actually, if you look at what are the serious interventions they're making, they're limited, right? I think some organizations are more well-meaning and they do want to do things. Unfortunately, we live in an ecosystem where in isolation, some of these things are not able to materialize themselves. Although you gave us some very good examples in terms of the Dubai Aluminium Organization Corporation, which put it right. I think complexities like things like AI will just make this issue more complex. I actually just think that there needs to be more ownership right at the top of the organization, right, in terms of how do we deal with this? And I agree with you that academia has to do things very differently, right, to what they've done in the past, because where academia is now focused predominantly, or at least what I see, is all about and I know you don't like that term, but it's hard skills, right? How do we make someone technically proficient so he or she can get into the right college, and the ones who are in college, how they can get their jobs? Because the fact is that if they don't, AI is going to eat up their jobs, and therefore we're going to have unemployment in a big way. So I think this is all very hyper connected. Any last thoughts, Scott, before we end?
I would say don't write Gen Z off just yet.
No, I'm not writing anybody off.
But you know, and I've seen it just, you know, with my son who's gone to university, and he's grown up in Dubai. Like he's grown up in the GCC all his life. You know, and he has had a quite comfortable life, much more comfortable than mine was.
Okay.
But then I've seen him been thrown into uncomfortable situations, and he has come through that, and he struggled through it, but he's come through it and come out the other side and thrived. I think Gen Z are working through this problem in real time, and I think they'll get there. Or, you know, but you're right that they need help. They need our help. They need leaders' help. And also the other thing, we're having this conversation now, and we're saying, oh, you know, organizations haven't got this down right. Let's face it, like the pandemic really crystallized this issue for all of us.
So they haven't had enough time.
Yeah. So we haven't had enough time. Like, what we've had one system for 100 years since Henry Ford brought it in. We're now 3 years into this evolving situation. We're in a period of disruption. And I think the only thing I say to organizations is that the business world is littered with stories of organizations that ignored disruption when it came. You know, we saw Kodak and the smart camera, digital cameras, and, you know, and we saw Nokia and smartphones. When you ignore disruption, you go out of business, basically. So you are in a period of disruption.
And mental health is one of those disruptions. And I think we should actually recognize it as one. I think that's
it's not a nice to have anymore. It is a fundamental.
It is a fundamental. I totally agree with you. And I speak both from a societal and a business perspective. And just to qualify, I'm not writing the Gen Zs off. As a matter, I think we need them, because actually they are the future of this economy that we're all going to live in. All I'm saying is that I think that there are things that we need to do differently, right? And including themselves, and they need to recognize that, you know, the world is not just all bed of roses, right? And again, I'm against sweeping generalization. Not every economy, every part of the world
absolutely
lives that way, but I think we do. I appreciate, Scott, you coming in.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the conversation.
Well,
and thank you for talking about mental health, because that's
I think it's a very important topic, right? Because, you know, I'm part of an industry where I think we have a genuine issue, because it's actually a very high stress environment, and you know, people sometimes don't want to talk about mental health. I actually come out of a society, I'm ethnically Indian. In India, we don't talk about mental health because it's actually seen as a weakness, right? I've seen things change for the better in the last 15 to 20 years, which is actually great news, right? But I think things have to jump up, and I think organizations have to start playing a bigger role. And I say that I don't say that lightly, because as a matter of fact, we are the organization. And, you know, sometimes that's what frustrates me, when people like me also use the word as us and them, because we are the them, right? Organizations are nothing else but the people inside an organization, right? Unless we are an organization run by AI, and we haven't seen many of those yet, or at least none. But having said that,
I think, yet.
I use the word yet on everything these days, right? But thank you for coming in.
Very well, thank you.
And best of luck with Mentl.
Thank you.
And I'm sure our paths will cross again.
Absolutely. I'll see you in the hairdressers.
Exactly with that. So, ladies and gentlemen, well, I hope this was an interesting episode. It was a breakaway from what typical discussions we would tend to have on the couch, which would be about the future of finance. I think the issue of mental health is critical, and it does not matter where you live, whether it's the UAE, India, or the United States. It's a topic I shouldn't go on much longer about, because you'll start seeing the lack of depth I have on it. So with that, goodbye, and we'll see you next week.